We're joined by Islamic scholar Omar Suleiman. He's a civil rights activist and the founder of Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research. Omar, thank you so much for coming on. Now, we've heard about these very alarming reports of abuse and neglect that Palestinian prisoners are facing. How prevalent is this issue right now?
Well, I think that it represents what has been the case prior to October 7th and only, unfortunately, escalated after October 7th. You know, for the last few years, you've had protests on one side to maintain apartheid, to maintain an occupation, and to increase the firepower that is being used against innocent civilians, despite all of the outcries from international human rights organizations. On the other side, you've had protests to end an occupation, to end apartheid. And now you see protests to continue a genocide and protests for a ceasefire around the world. Yet somehow, just like you have the irony of a people that are under the brutality of this genocide being cast as barbarians and savages, as opposed to the defenders of light and civilization, on the other hand, that are dropping bombs that are in unprecedented fashion on a civilian population, you now see people that are actually protesting for sexual abuse of Palestinian detainees and Palestinian prisoners. We have been, raising the alarm in the West for so many years now to say that this has not only gotten out of hand, it has been out of hand, and your failure to do anything about it, in fact, your enabling of it, is going to bring it to a place where it is undeniable to any neutral observer around the world, and it will require every form of intervention, legal intervention, political intervention, yes, even military intervention, to withhold the hand that continues to maim the Palestinian people, which at this point is every single structure of Israeli society that is unfortunately showing itself with its depravity as we see it right now.
And we actually do have some clips we're going to listen to from Palestinians who were held captive in some of Israel's prisons now. Let's take a look.
In the beginning of the war, we were subjected to severe beatings, torture, and sustained serious injuries, some of which required hospitalization. Thank God this has eased after 50 days from the start of the war, but there is still mistreatment of prisoners and a lack of attention to medical issues, as well as shortages in food, medicine, blankets, and clothing.
I saw prisoners killed and trampled on with boots. 3,000 brothers of mine are there. Some of them are sick with chronic diseases in need of food and medicine, and they need doctors. Some of them have died. Let me tell you what happened with me. They took me out of prison for interrogation. They took me to a place I don't know. They broke my head, broke my hand, and paralyzed me.
I was hungry and thirsty for 5 days, while my hand and feet in handcuffs. My feet were shackled. Shackles were linked to the bed. My hands were handcuffed. I was only can make voice. My wish to see him regain his health and memory and get to know his children.
Harrowing stuff. And Omar, we've had the Israeli army denying that systemic abuse against Palestinians is taking place in their prisons. But there are organizations like Amnesty International that say that rampant torture is taking place. What do you think needs to be done? What actions need to happen to stop this?
So I think that it's important to say that if you were to take the catalog of human rights abuses in these prisons prior to the current ongoing genocide, it would have been enough to warrant an ICC criminal case against Benjamin Netanyahu. It would have been enough to warrant an arms embargo on Israel. It would have been enough to warrant the outrage that we are demanding to see from these international bodies of accountability now. I think that it is important for us to recognize that the Palestinian people have been left with no recourse. They have been left with absolutely no way of seeking justice for themselves. And so it becomes incumbent upon all of those governments around the world to now be reined in so that they could rein in this particular illegal settler colonial regime that continues to carry these out. We simply have been saying this entire time, we need to make all of these bodies accountable to the international laws that you have sanctified, that you have made so sacred for the rest of us. Why is it that only the Palestinians are held to the standard that you have supposedly set up these entire international structures for? So what needs to happen right now is that there needs to be an embargo on Israel, an economic embargo, an arms embargo. There needs to be a way by which this regime is made accountable so that it doesn't have the blank check to continue to carry out these abuses without fearing anything but an empty statement from the United States government or from governments around the world.
And slightly away from Israel, there's been a new report saying that attacks and discrimination against US Muslims and Palestinians jumped by 70% in just the first half of this year. That's according to the Council on American-Islamic Relations. How concerned are you about what's being described as a bias against Palestinians in the West?
So I think that I could speak for many Muslim Americans, Palestinian Americans, people of conscience that are not Muslim or Palestinian, that have been in these encampments, that have been at the front lines of these protests, that whatever we encounter over a span of the next several years would not be equivalent to what one day in Gaza has been like. And so I'm deeply concerned, obviously, for the well-being of my community. I have been at the funerals of Palestinian children, Palestinian American children that have been killed in the United States. We've seen hate crimes, unfortunately, unfolding at an alarming pace. But we are seeking to be as resilient as we see the people of Gaza being. And what that means is that while calling out the rising hate crimes and the abuses that exist right now in the domain of the United States, as well as many Western nations that claim to be anti-discrimination, we're also seeking to bring to the forefront the fact that Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian bigotry are the exact same thing. You know, it's the same tools of dehumanization that have allowed for the abuse of people at home that goes completely underreported and leaves this out of the headlines, that we've seen, unfortunately, a much more dramatic unfolding of in Palestine and in different parts of the Muslim world. So these tools of dehumanization are exactly the same, and therefore, when we take the most dramatic manifestation of that and we combat that together, then that will have structural implications domestically as well.
And do you think that countries like the US, their governments, are doing enough at the moment to crack down on these types of hate crimes against Palestinians?
No, in fact, I think that they have enabled, unfortunately, again, the hate machine. To show just the connection, when we said Genocide Joe, when President Biden, repeated the debunked lies about beheaded Israeli babies, that's exactly what translated into a man in Chicago going and beheading young Wadi al-Fayoumi. And so you can't say that you are opposed to discrimination at home and seeking to meet with the Muslim community at home and meet with the Palestinian community at home while carrying out the largest genocide that we have ever seen play out on our screens in real time, using the exact same structures and tools of dehumanization. So they've done absolutely nothing. Again, we're beyond empty statements. We no longer want statements of concern. We want policies that are consistent with the human rights structures that you have put up for us to supposedly abide by and hold sacred. Be consistent with your own policies. Be consistent with the things that you have put forth. And unfortunately, in the capacity of that, repeated debunked lies about the other side, while we are seeing thousands and thousands of Palestinians suffer due to those lies.
Omar Suleiman, thank you so much for taking the time to come in with us today.
Thank you for having me.